In the heart of Silicon Valley, where power and privilege seemed to flow freely, one man had it all: wealth, influence, and the arrogance to match. Harrison Trent, a billionaire tech mogul, had built his empire on the backs of those he deemed inferior. But his latest stunt, mocking a black employee in front of a room full of high-ranking executives, would be the catalyst for something no one could have predicted. As laughter echoed through the boardroom, no one noticed the quiet resolve in the eyes of the man he had ridiculed. What happened next would not only shatter Trent's empire but change the lives of everyone in the room. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence as Harrison Trent's laughter faded into the background. His words, sharp and cutting, had been aimed at Marcus Williams, a quiet, unassuming software engineer who had worked at Trent Technologies for over 5 years. It wasn't the first time Marcus had been the target of Harrison's cruel jokes, but something about today felt different. Marcus stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the billionaire with an intensity that made the air thick with tension. The other executives exchanged nervous glances, unsure of how to react. They had seen Harrison humiliate employees before, but this time, it felt as if they were witnessing the breaking point of someone who had always remained calm under pressure. Without a word, Marcus straightened his shoulders, his usual demeanor replaced by an unexpected, almost eerie calm. He walked toward the front of the room, all eyes following his every move. The silence deepened as he approached the whiteboard, picked up a marker, and wrote something no one was expecting. "I will never forget this moment," he wrote in bold, sharp strokes. Then, turning to Harrison with a cold, steady look, Marcus spoke, his voice low but powerful. "You've mocked me for the last time." The billionaire smirked, thinking it was just another defiant employee standing up for himself. But then, the air in the room shifted, almost imperceptibly, like a storm gathering on the horizon. Marcus stepped back, letting his words sink in as he slowly reached into his pocket. From the depths of his jacket, Marcus pulled out a small, unassuming device. No one knew what it was at first, but the moment he clicked it, the entire building's lights flickered. Then, just as quickly, everything went dark. The room was plunged into a tense, complete blackout. There was a heartbeat of silence, followed by the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and drawing closer. The footsteps echoed ominously through the darkness, but no one moved. The only sound in the room was the rapid beating of hearts, as if the entire boardroom was holding its breath. The seconds stretched into what felt like eternity, and in the pitch black, every person wondered the same thing. What was Marcus going to do next? Then, the lights flickered back to life, but something was different. The usual hum of the fluorescent lights was gone, replaced by a soft, unfamiliar buzz that seemed to pulse through the very walls. The room was bathed in a strange, eerie glow from a series of new screens that had appeared out of nowhere, casting an unsettling blue light on the faces of the shocked executives. Marcus stood at the center of the room, his calm demeanor now replaced by a focused determination. He had hacked into the system, something no one thought possible. The billionaire's empire, the very foundation of Trent Technologies, was now under his control. "I told you," Marcus said, his voice colder now, laced with authority. "You don't get to treat people like they're disposable." Harrison Trent, still in disbelief, stood frozen. His usual bravado was gone, replaced by a rare vulnerability. "What is this?" he demanded, trying to assert dominance, but his voice trembled. Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he manipulated the new screens, displaying live footage of Harrison's past dealings, illegal contracts, questionable decisions, and some deeply personal, yet highly incriminating, interactions. The room fell silent once again, But this time, it wasn't from shock. It was from fear. You thought you could hide behind your wealth, your status, your power, Marcus said, walking around the room now, his voice rising. But it was never about the money. It was about respect, about humanity, and you've been disrespecting everyone here. The executives, now aware of the depth of what Marcus had done, exchanged nervous glances. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. Some of them, once loyal to Trent, began to question their own roles in the toxic culture he had created. Harrison's eyes widened, his arrogance slowly replaced by panic. "You're going to regret this," he spat, his face flushed with anger. But Marcus only shook his head. "No, Harrison, you're the one who's going to regret underestimating people like me." Then, with a swift movement, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind stunned silence. The finality of his actions hung in the air like a storm ready to break. Outside, the world had already begun to change. News of what had happened inside those walls spread faster than anyone could have imagined. Marcus Williams was no longer just an employee. He was a symbol of resistance, of defiance, of the power that even one person could have when they refused to bow to corruption. But this was only the beginning. The story that had started with a single mocking remark was now spiraling into something much, much bigger. And Harrison Trent's empire, built on greed and arrogance, was about to come crashing down. The world outside the glass walls of Trent Technologies was changing quickly. Marcus's actions had ignited a firestorm of media coverage, and in the blink of an eye, the quiet, humble software engineer had become a national hero. News outlets called it the rise of the unlikely hero, and social media was flooded with support, hashtags, and viral videos of the dramatic moment. People who had long been silenced, ignored, or oppressed found a voice in Marcus. But within the walls of Trent Technologies, things were spiraling in a different direction. Harrison Trent, once the embodiment of untouchable power, had gone into hiding, his name now synonymous with corruption and arrogance. The SEC had opened an investigation into his company, and several board members, once loyal to him, had begun cooperating with authorities. The once mighty billionaire found himself facing the consequences of his own actions. For Marcus, the battle was far from over. The next few days felt like a blur of meetings, phone calls, and media appearances. He had gone from just another worker in a corporate machine to a symbol of resistance, someone who stood up for justice, for dignity. But Marcus knew better than to get lost in the glory of his moment. The real work was just beginning. The first major change came swiftly. Trent Technologies, now under investigation, announced that they would be conducting a full internal audit, promising reform. But Marcus knew that real change didn't come from the top down. It came from the ground up. He decided to take matters into his own hands. He called a meeting with the employees of Trent Technologies, the same ones who had watched in silence as Harrison Trent had mocked him. They had been complicit in allowing the toxic culture to thrive, but Marcus had no intention of condemning them. He wanted them to join him in rebuilding a company that valued people over profit. "I didn't do this for fame," Marcus said, addressing the gathered employees in the conference room. "I did this because I believe in the power of change. I believe that we can make this place different. It's not about one person taking down another. It's about all of us coming together and saying, 'This stops now.'" Slowly, one by one, heads nodded in agreement. The room that had once been filled with fear and doubt was now buzzing with the energy of something new. Hope. The power had shifted, and Marcus wasn't going to let it slip through his fingers. Meanwhile, Harrison Trent, isolated and surrounded by mounting legal trouble, had been forced into hiding. The weight of his actions was catching up with him in ways he never anticipated. His empire was crumbling, and the people he had once looked down on were the ones who were building something far greater than any tech company he could have ever imagined. The final blow came when the SEC released their findings. Evidence of fraud, exploitation, and countless unethical practices under Trent's leadership. Harrison was charged, and his name was forever tarnished. As the media circus surrounding his fall from grace played out, Marcus quietly worked behind the scenes, pushing for a new leadership model, one rooted in transparency, respect, and, above all, accountability. Months passed, and the world began to see the fruits of Marcus's efforts. Trent Technologies underwent a complete transformation. The company, once a symbol of greed and corruption, now became a beacon of innovation and social responsibility. And Marcus? He became the new CEO not because he sought power, but because he was the kind of leader who understood what it meant to fight for something greater than himself. In a final twist, Harrison Trent was offered a seat in the company's board, not as an executive, but as an advisor. The company, now dedicated to ethical practices, wanted to make sure that the lessons of the past were never forgotten. Marcus stood in front of the same boardroom where everything had begun, looking out at the faces of his employees, no longer nameless figures but partners in a shared vision. He smiled to himself, knowing that the world had just witnessed something extraordinary. Not just the downfall of one man, but the rise of many. And so, the story of a mocking billionaire and a quiet engineer had come full circle. It had been a fight not just for justice but for the possibility of a new world, one where power was no longer a privilege of the few, but a responsibility shared by all. The end? Perhaps, but for Marcus it was only the beginning.